Our conversation with State Representative Jim Struzzi is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people back to work. And in Harrisburg yesterday, Representative Struzzi is back here in Indiana now. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
Good to have you with us here today. There's a lot of activity yesterday in Harrisburg, wasn't there?
Well, there certainly was over the past few days. This is unprecedented, and we really had to make some big decisions, take some big actions to help the people that we represent, to help the people across the Commonwealth, and more importantly, to help those people on the front lines fighting this pandemic.
All right, so let's review some of the actions that were taken yesterday. Let's start right there with health care as a whole. I know that the House and the Senate both were addressing that.
Yeah, the big thing is, of course, we're all hearing the stories of the shortage of masks and ventilators and other equipment that's needed to treat patients and to keep our healthcare workers safe. So we authorized up to $50 million. That's $50 million to be spent to provide the equipment that they need, to provide more masks, anything that's needed on the front lines. And that includes EMS workers, people in the hospital facilities, et cetera. So $50 million, that money would come from surplus funds, funds that aren't spent in the current year's budget to provide that vital and necessary equipment.
Yeah, we're hearing, of course, from the governor yesterday saying that there's a really good chance that hospitals are going to be overwhelmed here pretty soon, and they're going to have to look for other facilities. We know some state system schools have offered residence halls since they're all closed right now. And they may be taking over some hotels, too, and certainly that's going to be an added expense. And the point I'm making is that there are expenses out there that are going to crop up that absolutely need to be addressed, and we don't even know what they are yet.
And that's a great point, Todd, because we realize, the actions that we took this week are not the only actions that we're going to have to take. This is a step in the right direction. And we're on 12-hour call, which means we can be called back to Harrisburg in a 12-hour time frame. We are scheduled to go back in early April, but the House leadership told us to be prepared. So whatever actions need to be taken as these crazy days continue to unfold and circumstances arise that we're not prepared for, that we are ready to go back and take additional actions that are needed to provide for our healthcare workers and to provide for our communities and our businesses.
It's kind of hard to imagine what the atmosphere is like in the state capitol hallways right now and then inside the chamber. So what else were some of the highlights of yesterday for you?
Well, I think some of the key things, and I'm sure a lot of the news media are already covering, are the changes to the education code, waiving the 180-day requirement for public schools and non-public as well, including home education. The temporary elimination of the testing and the evaluations, allowing more flexibility for flexible instruction days. Basically, to take the handcuffs off of education and allow them to be creative in how they're educating our kids. It's my kids have been home for going on a week and a half now, and I think it's so important that these kids continue to be educated, as we all do. So basically, the changes in the election code allow schools and school districts and even homeschooling more flexibility to provide that education. I know there were some concerns with charter school funding. It also, locks in schools to where they were as of March 13th so that they don't accrue additional costs related to charter schools. Those are some of the key things as far as the education code. The other big things yesterday and over the course of this week were the election reforms. Of course, we formally moved the primary to June 2nd, which I think a lot of people expected to happen. A couple of other changes that occurred with that. It also allowed for the consolidation of polling places. I heard from some constituents that were concerned with that. Obviously, we're doing the social distancing and we don't want large gatherings. So, how does consolidating polling places help that? And the answer I was given is there may be a shortage of people working the polls. Who knows what's going to happen here in the future with the whole coronavirus, but that was one of the changes. And then I'd also spoken with our county election officials, and they were concerned that there could be an inordinate amount of mail-in ballots because people don't want to go to the polls. So we were able to do some compromises on that and allow mail-in ballots to be pre-canvassed, which means basically you open them, you don't tabulate the votes, but you can open them as of 7 a.m. on Election Day, so that helps them get a little bit of jump on being able to tabulate those results once the polls close on Election Day. And then there were a number of other things, Todd, but the other big thing is related to unemployment compensation, taking some of the burden off of employers and business owners, and then allowing for more flexibility when it comes to how you can apply, waiving the job search requirements and helping to make it a little bit easier for people to get unemployment.
Changes happen so rapidly now, by the hour, it seems, in Harrisburg and all across the state. I want to go back to education for a second. I thought it was kind of refreshing yesterday, the Education Secretary Rivera saying, there are some things we just don't know in terms of, compulsory education, testing of students, how do we meet graduation requirements, and all of these different things. There's a task force that he's formed on it, but those are kinds of, you're going to have to react to some of those measures that they come up with. And I know that makes it awful difficult, puts a lot of pressure on lawmakers to get it right when maybe all the information isn't there.
Oh, these are truly unprecedented circumstances for all of us, and we're doing our best to navigate as we can. I think the important thing is that, by the actions that we took in Harrisburg, we're basically allowing the Secretary of Education and educators to make those decisions. A lot of these things have been locked into law, and we basically untied their hands, allowing for more creativity in how we provide the necessary education that our students and our families need.
As you were meeting yesterday, there was the practical, logistical aspects of what you were doing. All you folks were gathering in one room, in one chamber. Was everybody socially distanced properly?
Well, yes, they were. I think if you saw any of the photos from the House floor, a number of people were not there. We had the choice to be there in person or to basically vote from our district offices. I made the decision to be there because, as I said, I think it's important that you're there in person to debate these things, to make sure that you're speaking on behalf of the people that you represent. We did practice social distancing. I did not shake a single hand while I was there. It's actually a handshake-free zone in Harrisburg right now. There are signs on the wall. Yeah. And even when we were in caucus, we kept a seat between us, tried to maintain those distances. And I respect those who chose to stay home and vote from their district offices, but I felt it important to be there in person to represent the people of Indiana County.
While the discussions going on yesterday and the votes being taken, dealing directly with the COVID-19 crisis on the back burner, for the first time ever probably at this time of the year, the state budget, those appropriations talks continue. And those are things that really have to be dealt with, but they're going to have to be dealt with in a whole different way. Tell me about those discussions, if they're even taking place right now.
Really, they're not, Todd. We're focused on addressing this pandemic, providing for the people of the Commonwealth, providing for our healthcare workers. The budget right now is truly on the back burner. We'll have to see how things, come out once we've been through this pandemic and things settle down. Obviously, there's a lot of money and resources being spent right now, but our focus is on this pandemic. It's on providing for our communities. It's on helping our small businesses survive, all of our businesses survive. We spent a lot of time in Harrisburg trying to work with the governor's office to get some businesses up and running. I know there's just so much confusion and angst really over the entire process and the way that businesses were shut down, the waiver process. My office, district office, has been spending almost all of our time trying to help businesses navigate these uncharted waters, and it's very, very challenging. So the budget right now is really not at the forefront of our concerns. We will figure that out once we see where we are on the other side of this pandemic.
Tell me about the information race in Harrisburg, because you guys are making decisions. You have to have information on which to base those decisions. How does that filter down to you? Does it come from the leadership? Is it stuff you have to gather independently? How does it work?
We do a number of conference calls. Obviously, leadership has done a great job putting a lot of the bulk of these bills together that we pass. They share a lot of information with us. We get frequent emails from the various state departments, from the Department of Health, Department of Human Services, Education, a lot of information via email. But we do our best to try and disseminate that information back out. As I continue to mention, everything that I receive, I put out on Facebook if I can, or we still continue to do our weekly emails, and people can find information on my website. But basically, it's a communication chain by all of the resources that we have available. We're doing frequent conference calls, and matter of fact, I have a conference call this afternoon with the Department of Health for the latest update, and I do have some concerns with the Department of Health. As you know, our first case was identified yesterday here in Indiana County, and I really have some concerns with the fact that it took more than a week for us to get those test results.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bring that up with the Department of Health because I think people need to know as soon as possible when there's a case in the proximity of someone they could have come in contact with. So a lot of information is bouncing around back and forth, and we want to make sure we're putting out accurate information and timely information.
He's State Representative Jim Struzzi. So as you look at the next week or 10 days, what are going to be some of the priorities that you're looking at?
Well, we're continuing to try and work with the governor's office to get more businesses back up and running. A lot of the conversation revolved around businesses that are basically outside construction industry businesses, residential and commercial construction. Those people practice social distancing on a daily basis because a lot of them are outside working, and we don't understand the reasoning for shutting construction projects down. So we're going to continue to try and get more businesses up and running, provided they can be run safely. There were concerns with, the smaller businesses that maybe have one or two employees. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason why they can't continue to function. And on the other side of this, we're going to have to address the impacts on our economy. And that is one of the big concerns that many of my colleagues in Harrisburg expressed across the Commonwealth. Obviously, this is a very serious pandemic. If you saw the stories coming out of New York even today, Todd, I think everyone needs to take this very seriously. But we also need to put food on people's tables, and we need to provide for our families. And if you can't work, you can't do that. So, that's going to be a lot of the discussion that we have over the next few days, continuing to try and get more waivers approved or get the governor to allow more businesses to function. There's a whole lot of things we're involved in right now. And I think the bottom line is we have to do what's right for the health of our families, the health of our communities, and to get everyone the resources and information they need to get through this.
He is State Representative Jim Struzzi spending some time with us this morning. Thanks a lot. Be safe today.
Thank you, Todd. You too.
There he is. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160, 101.1 FM 60, 101.1 FM 60.